My son's art teacher requested a parent meeting to discuss his concerning self-portraits. The art teacher's hands were shaking when she slid the folder across the conference table. Inside were 12 self-portraits my 7-year-old son had drawn over the past month, and in every single one, he'd colored himself gray. Not blue, not sad-looking with tears, completely gray, head to toe, like he'd dipped himself in concrete. His smile was there in each picture, that gap-toothed grin I knew so well, but his skin, his clothes, even his hair were rendered in careful, methodical gray crayon. Ms. Brennan, the art teacher, kept apologizing as she showed them to me, her voice cracking on words like dissociation and trauma indicators. I sat there in that elementary school conference room with its alphabet border and motivational posters, staring at my son's gray face repeated 12 times, and my first thought wasn't concern. It was confusion. Because Oliver was fine. He was happy. We'd just gone to the arcade last Saturday, and he'd laughed so hard at the basketball game that chocolate milk came out of his nose. I'd been Oliver's primary parent for 3 years, ever since the divorce finalized and Denise moved to Portland for her new job. The custody arrangement was supposed to be 50-50, but her career took off in ways neither of us expected, and gradually her weekends became once-a-month visits, then holidays only, then phone calls that she'd squeeze in between conference calls. I didn't resent it. Not really. Oliver and I had our routine. Monday mornings were waffle mornings. Friday nights were pizza and movie nights. Every Sunday we'd go to the park and feed the ducks, even in winter when the pond was frozen and the ducks were nowhere to be found. He was thriving, or so I thought. His second-grade teacher, Mrs. Kowalski, sent home glowing reports. He had friends. He scored well on reading tests. He loved science class and wanted to be a paleontologist. The kid was 7 and could pronounce paleontologist. So when the school called asking me to come in for an emergency meeting about Oliver's art, I honestly thought maybe he'd drawn something inappropriate, like a dinosaur eating a teacher or a joke about butts. Ms. Brennan was young, maybe late 20s, with paint permanently under her fingernails, and that earnest expression that art teachers always seem to have. She'd asked the school counselor to join us, David Reeves, a soft-spoken man who'd been with the district for 15 years and had a reputation for actually giving a damn. They both looked at me with such careful concern that my defenses went up immediately. Oliver's a bright kid, Ms. Brennan started, fidgeting with her bracelet. He's creative, engaged in class, always volunteering to help clean brushes. But these self-portraits are part of a unit we do on identity and self-expression, and Oliver's work has been consistent in a way that concerns me. She spread the drawings out like tarot cards. January through March, 12 pictures, all the same. Gray boy, colorful background. In one, he was gray at a birthday party with bright balloons. In another, gray at the beach with a yellow sun. Gray at Christmas with a green tree. Gray, gray, gray. When I asked him why he chose gray, she continued, he said it was because that's what color he is now. The word now hit me like a fist. What do you mean now? I asked, picking up the most recent drawing. It was dated 3 days ago. Oliver had drawn himself at the park, our park, with the duck pond, and he'd colored the grass green, the sky blue, the ducks brown and white. But his own figure was gray, standing separate from everything else, outlined carefully in black marker to make sure the gray was distinct. Has Oliver experienced any recent changes at home? Mr. Reeves asked gently. A move? A loss? Any disruptions to his routine? I shook my head. Nothing had changed. We lived in the same house we'd been in since before the divorce. Same school, same friends, same everything. I worked from home as a software consultant, which meant I was always there for drop-off and pickup. I knew his teachers, his friends' parents, his schedule better than I knew my own. What about visitation with his mother? Ms. Brennan asked carefully, and I felt my jaw tighten. Not out of anger, just exhaustion. This was always where these conversations went. Mr. Reeves pulled out a binder with notes he'd compiled. I've been observing Oliver informally for the past 3 weeks, he explained, flipping through pages covered in careful handwriting. He's socially engaged during recess, but when kids talk about their families, particularly their mothers, he goes quiet. Last week, during a classroom activity about family traditions, he told Mrs. Kowalski he didn't have any traditions with his mom anymore because she lives in a different time zone. Those were his exact words. The counselor looked at me with professional compassion. Kids his age shouldn't be thinking in terms of time zones as barriers to connection. That's an awareness that suggests he's trying to make sense of emotional distance through geographical logic. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. I'd heard Oliver mention the time zone thing before, had even thought it was cute, precocious. Now it sounded like what it was, a 7-year-old rationalizing why his mother couldn't make time for him. Ms. Brennan opened another folder, this one containing examples from other students. These are typical self-portraits from second graders, she said, showing me a rainbow of crayon drawings. Kids with brown skin and black hair, kids with pale skin and blonde hair, kids with freckles and glasses and missing teeth. All rendered in realistic or exaggerated colors, but recognizably human. Children this age are developing self-concept through their art. They're learning to see themselves as individuals distinct from but connected to their environment. Oliver's consistent choice to remove himself from the color spectrum is neurologically significant. It suggests he's processing some form of disconnection that goes beyond normal childhood struggles. She showed me one more drawing, this one from early January, before the gray phase started. Oliver had drawn himself at his 6th birthday party, 18 months ago, when Denise had still been visiting regularly. In that picture, he was bright orange, the color of joy and excitement. The contrast made my throat tight. Denise hadn't seen Oliver since Thanksgiving, and that visit had been rushed. She'd flown in for 3 days, stayed at a hotel, and spent most of that time on her laptop dealing with some crisis at work. Oliver hadn't complained. He'd come home with stories about the hotel pool and room service pancakes. But now, sitting in this conference room looking at 12 gray self-portraits, I wondered what I'd missed. "She's been busy," I said, which was both true and pathetically inadequate. The last visit was November. They talk on the phone most Sundays. Usually, when she remembered, when her schedule allowed. "We're not suggesting neglect, Mr." Reeves said quickly, and I appreciated that he said "we" instead of letting me feel ganged up on. But sometimes children process feelings of abandonment or invisibility in unexpected ways. Gray can represent feeling erased, unseen, or disconnected from the world around them. He pulled out a tablet and showed me articles, research studies, case examples. I nodded along, but inside I was screaming. Oliver wasn't invisible. I saw him every goddamn day. I made his lunches. I helped with homework. I listened to his dinosaur facts at dinner. But seeing wasn't the same as understanding, and I was starting to realize I'd been seeing the surface, the smiles, the good grades, the easy laughter, while missing what was happening underneath. "Mr." Reeves mentioned something else that made my blood run cold. Oliver's been spending lunch periods in the library instead of the cafeteria. When I asked why, he said it was quieter there, easier to think. But the librarian, Mrs. Chen, he caught himself. "Sorry, Mrs. Liu," mentioned he mostly just sits in the corner staring at picture books about families, not reading them, just looking at the pictures. The image of my son sitting alone in a library, studying illustrations of intact families like artifacts from another world, was almost more than I could handle. "Why didn't anyone tell me this before?" I asked, and my voice came out sharper than I intended. Ms. Brennan's eyes were kind, but firm. "We're telling you now, and we're here to help, not to judge. This isn't about fault. It's about Oliver needing support that goes beyond what we can provide in a school setting." That evening, I tried to bring it up casually. We were at the kitchen table, and Oliver was building a Lego spaceship while I pretended to work on my laptop. "Hey, bud," I said, keeping my voice light. "Ms. Brennan showed me your self-portraits from art class. Those are really cool." He didn't look up, just snapped another piece into place. "They're okay," he said. "I like the backgrounds better." I waited, but he didn't elaborate. "I noticed you used a lot of gray," I continued. "That's an interesting choice. How come you made yourself that color?" Oliver shrugged, that universal kid gesture that means anything from "I don't know" to "I don't want to talk about it" to "I'm hungry." "It just felt right," he said. "Can we have tacos tomorrow?" And that was it. He moved on, chattering about how his spaceship was going to have laser cannons and a hyperdrive, while I sat there feeling like I'd failed some crucial parenting test. That night, after he was asleep, I called Denise. She answered on the 4th ring, distracted. "Hey, is everything okay? I'm in the middle of something." I told her about the meeting, about the drawings, about the gray. There was a long pause. "Kids draw weird things," Denise said finally. "Remember when he went through that phase where he only drew robots? This is probably the same thing." Her tone was dismissive, but I could hear something underneath it. Defensiveness, maybe, or guilt. "The art teacher thinks it might be about feeling invisible or abandoned," I said, and regretted it immediately. Denise's voice went cold. "Are you blaming me? I call him every week. I send gifts. I'm doing the best I can with my schedule." We'd had this fight before, too many times to count. I was too understanding. She was too absent. Round and round. "I'm not blaming anyone," I said, rubbing my eyes. "I just wanted you to know. The school counselor thinks maybe we should take him to a child psychologist just to rule out anything serious." Denise sighed. "Fine. Set it up. I'll contribute to the cost. But I really think this is being blown out of proportion." We said our goodbyes, polite and hollow, and I sat in the dark living room wondering how we'd gotten here, wondering how I'd missed whatever was making my son color himself the shade of nothing. I spent that night doing what every terrified parent does, frantically Googling child psychology articles at 2 a.m. I found studies about children of divorce, about attachment theory, about the ways kids express emotional distress through art. One article mentioned a case study of an 8-year-old who'd started drawing exclusively in black and white after a parent's deployment, another about a girl who'd stopped including herself in family drawings altogether after her father remarried. The common thread was absence, loss, the child's perception that they'd been demoted in someone's priorities. I thought about Denise's last visit, how she'd shown up with expensive gifts, but had taken 3 work calls during Oliver's school play. I thought about the way he'd stopped asking when Mom was coming, stopped mentioning her in casual conversation, stopped expecting anything. and I realized that Oliver's gray phase hadn't started with the drawings. It had started months ago, when he'd decided that wanting his mother was too painful, so he'd just stopped. The drawings were just when it became visible to anyone who bothered to look. The child psychologist's office was in one of those professional buildings that tries too hard to be welcoming. Bright colors, abstract art, a fish tank in the waiting room that Oliver immediately gravitated toward. Dr. Nina Pacheco came out to greet us, and I liked her instantly. She was maybe 50, with laugh lines and an easy manner that put Oliver at ease. "I hear you're interested in dinosaurs," she said, shaking his hand seriously. "I have a Triceratops skull replica in my office. It's not real, but it's pretty cool. Want to see it?" Oliver nodded enthusiastically, and I watched him disappear through the door with her, feeling that particular parental anxiety of surrendering your child to a professional and hoping they'll unlock secrets you couldn't access yourself. I spent the next 45 minutes in the waiting room, reading the same magazine page 6 times without absorbing a single word. When Dr. Pacheco emerged without Oliver, he was still in her office, she explained, drawing. Her expression was carefully neutral. "Oliver's a delightful kid," she started, leading me to a smaller consultation room. "He's bright, articulate, emotionally intelligent for his age. We played some games, did some drawing together, talked about school and home and friends." She pulled out her notes. "He draws himself gray because, and I'm quoting here, that's the color you turn when people forget to look at you." When I asked him to explain, he said sometimes he feels like he's there but not there, like when you leave a toy in a room and forget about it. My chest tightened. "But I don't forget him," I said. "I'm with him constantly. I know his schedule, his friends, his favorite everything." Dr. Pacheco nodded gently. "I believe you. But Oliver's experience of being seen isn't just about physical presence. It's about emotional attunement, about feeling like his internal world matters to the people he loves." She paused. "He mentioned his mother several times, always in past tense. Mom used to do this. Mom used to like that. Has he expressed feelings about her absence to you?" I thought about all the times I'd asked Oliver if he missed his mom, and he'd shrugged and changed the subject. I'd taken that as resilience, as him adjusting well. Now I wondered if it was avoidance, if he'd learned that expressing those feelings wouldn't change anything, so why bother? "Not directly," I admitted. "I've tried to bring it up, but he shuts down." Dr. Pacheco made a note. "That's common in children of divorce, especially when one parent becomes less present. Oliver's gray phase, and yes, I do think it's a phase, but one rooted in real emotional processing, is his way of expressing something he doesn't have words for yet. He feels partially erased, not by you specifically, but by the situation." She recommended weekly sessions for the next few months, just to give Oliver a consistent space to process. She also suggested I might benefit from a few solo sessions with a therapist who specialized in co-parenting after divorce. I agreed to everything, desperate to fix this, to restore my son's color, literal and metaphorical. Dr. Pacheco used something called play therapy in her sessions with Oliver, a technique where kids process emotions through games and creative activities rather than direct conversation. She explained the methodology to me after the second session. Children Oliver's age don't have the verbal sophistication to articulate complex emotional states, but they can show me through play. This week, we used puppets to act out family scenarios. Oliver chose a gray mouse puppet to represent himself and put it in a corner of the puppet theater while the other puppets had a party. When I asked the mouse puppet why it wasn't joining, Oliver said, and this is verbatim, "The mouse knows it's invited, but it also knows everyone will have more fun if it just watches instead." That level of self-erasure, that assumption that his presence is a burden rather than a gift, that's what we're working to untangle. She showed me sketches Oliver had made during their session, including one where he'd drawn a color wheel with a black X through his name. The clinical precision of it broke my heart. Over the next 2 weeks, Oliver had 3 sessions with Dr. Pacheco, and I started seeing Dr. Frost, a no-nonsense therapist who had the annoying habit of being right about everything. "You're trying to compensate," Dr. Frost said during our second session, after I'd spent 40 minutes describing my daily routine with Oliver in exhaustive detail. "You're being both parents, which is admirable but impossible. And Oliver can sense the effort. He can sense that you're trying to fill a gap, which means he's constantly aware the gap exists." I wanted to argue, but the truth settled in my stomach like a stone. I was trying to be enough for both of us, and in doing so, I was making Oliver hyper-aware of what was missing. "What am I supposed to do?" I asked. "Let him feel the loss? Watch him hurt?" Dr. Frost leaned forward. "Yes. Because he already does feel it. You're just not acknowledging it, which makes him feel like his pain is invisible, which makes him feel invisible." Dr. Frost assigned me homework. Keep a journal of moments where I noticed Oliver's emotional state versus my assumptions about it. Within a week, the discrepancies were glaring. I'd write, Oliver seemed happy at breakfast, and then, when I actually paid attention, I'd notice he'd barely eaten, had been moving his cereal around the bowl while staring out the window. I'd written, good bedtime, no issues, on a night when, if I'd actually listened instead of going through the routine on autopilot, I would have heard him ask 3 separate questions about whether people in Portland spoke English, whether they had the same holidays, whether Mom still remembered what his voice sounded like. Small questions with enormous implications that I'd answered with distracted reassurances instead of sitting with the fear underneath them. "You're present but absent, Doctor," Frost said when I brought her the journal. "You're there physically, but emotionally you're managing, not connecting. Oliver needs you to stop managing and start feeling with him." The breakthrough came during Oliver's 4th session with Dr. Pacheco. She'd asked me to join for the last 15 minutes, and when I walked in, Oliver was sitting on the floor with a huge piece of butcher paper spread out in front of him, covered in drawings. "Oliver's been working on a project," Dr. Pacheco explained. "He's drawing a timeline of himself." I sat down next to him, and he walked me through it. On the left side were pictures of our family before the divorce, stick figures of him, me, and Denise, all colored in bright, happy hues. Then there was a line, like a border, and on the other side, the drawings shifted. Me and Oliver were still colorful, but Denise's figure got smaller and smaller, appearing less and less frequently, until in the most recent drawings, she was gone entirely. And that's when Oliver started drawing himself gray. "It's not about Dad," Oliver said quietly, not looking at me. "Dad's always here. It's about Mom. She left, and I don't know if she's coming back, and it feels like maybe she forgot about me. And if she forgot, then maybe I'm the kind of person who's easy to forget, so I drew myself as the color of forgetting." I couldn't breathe. The logic of a 7-year-old, devastating in its simplicity. Dr. Pacheco handed me a tissue before I even realized I was crying. "Oliver," I managed, "your mom didn't forget you. She loves you so much. She's struggling to balance her life right now." Even as I said it, I heard how weak it sounded. How many times had I made excuses for Denise? How many times had I shielded Oliver from the truth of her absence? "It's okay if you're angry with her," I continued, and Oliver's eyes widened slightly. "It's okay if you miss her and feel sad. You don't have to protect my feelings or hers. You're allowed to feel all of it." Something shifted in Oliver's face. "I'm really mad at her," he whispered. "I'm so mad that she left and didn't even tell me why, and every time I think maybe she'll come visit, something comes up with her work, and I know work is important, but aren't I important too?" The floodgates opened. Oliver cried for 20 minutes straight, the kind of deep, body-shaking sobs that come from months of held-back pain. I held him and let him soak my shirt with tears and snot, and Dr. Pacheco sat quietly nearby, creating space for the grief to exist. When Oliver finally calmed down, exhausted, he looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "Am I still gray?" he asked. "Not to me," I said. "To me, you're every color. You're the brightest thing in my life." He thought about that. "Maybe I'm just gray on the outside," he said, "like camouflage, but underneath I'm still colorful, like those lizards that change colors." Dr. Pacheco smiled. "That's a perfect way to think about it, Oliver. Sometimes we protect ourselves by blending in, by making ourselves smaller or quieter, but the colors are always there, underneath, waiting for when it's safe to show them again." After that session, Dr. Pacheco spent 30 minutes with me alone, outlining what needed to happen next. Oliver's ready to express his anger and grief, which is healthy, but he needs consistent validation that these feelings won't drive you away. He also needs to hear directly from his mother. Not excuses, not promises, but acknowledgement. She needs to say out loud that she's been absent, that it's hurt him, and that it's not his fault. She handed me a document she'd prepared, a script essentially, of what Denise should say during their next conversation. I know this feels manipulative, giving her exact words, but right now Oliver needs specific reassurances. He needs to hear, "I chose work over you and that was wrong," not, "Things have been busy." Kids his age are concrete thinkers. They need concrete acknowledgement. I looked at the script, phrases like, "You deserved better from me," and "Your feelings are valid and important," and wondered if Denise would actually say them. Wondered if she'd be defensive, make excuses, turn it into another fight about expectations and impossible standards. That night, after I put Oliver to bed, I called Denise again. But this time, I didn't sugarcoat anything. "Oliver feels abandoned," I said bluntly. "He's been coloring himself gray in his self-portraits because he feels forgotten. We just had a major breakthrough in therapy, and you need to hear this." I told her everything. The drawings, the sessions, the timeline, Oliver's words. Denise was quiet for a long time. "I didn't know," she said finally, and her voice was thick. "I thought he was okay. I thought you were both okay. I thought me being successful was good for him, that I was showing him what hard work looks like." "He doesn't need a role model right now," I said, more gently than I felt. "He needs his mom, and if you can't be here physically, you need to find ways to be present emotionally. Consistent video calls, not just when you remember. Letters, care packages, photos. He needs to know he hasn't been erased from your life just because you're busy living it." To Denise's credit, she didn't get defensive. "You're right," she said. "I got so caught up in proving I could make it on my own, in building this career I'd always wanted, that I didn't realize what I was sacrificing. Or who." She paused. "I'll do better." I'll schedule regular video calls, every Sunday at 7 p.m., no matter what. I'll send letters between visits. I'll plan my trips home in advance so Oliver has something concrete to look forward to. Don't promise him things you can't deliver, I warned. That's worse than nothing. I know, she said quietly. I'm going to do better. I have to. We talked for another hour, actually talked, like we hadn't in years. We made a plan, a real co-parenting plan that acknowledged the reality of our situation, instead of pretending everything was fine. It wouldn't fix things overnight, but it was a start. It was acknowledgement. It was seeing the problem instead of looking past it. I sent Denise the script Dr. Pacheco had prepared, half expecting pushback. Instead, she called me at midnight, crying. I can't believe I made him feel like this, she said. I can't believe I convinced myself that providing financially was the same as being present. My own parents did that to me, worked constantly, thought money equaled love, and I swore I'd never do it to my kids. But here we are. There was something raw in her voice I hadn't heard in years, maybe ever. The vulnerability of a parent confronting their own failure. I'm going to say these things to him, she continued. Every single word on this list, because he needs to hear them. And then I'm going to follow through. I'm talking to my boss next week about restructuring my role. I can't keep doing 80-hour weeks if it means losing my son in the process. I wanted to believe her. God, I wanted to believe her. But belief required trust, and trust required evidence, and evidence would only come with time. The first Sunday video call under the new arrangement, I set up my laptop in the living room and then made myself scarce, giving them privacy. I could hear snatches of conversation from the kitchen, Denise's voice, unusually tentative, saying things like, "You're right to be angry," and "I should have been there." Oliver's responses were quiet, harder to make out, but at one point I heard him say, "Why did you leave?" And my heart stopped. Denise's answer was long, and when the call ended an hour later, Oliver came into the kitchen with red eyes, but something lighter in his expression. Mom said she's sorry, he told me. She said she messed up and she's going to fix it. He paused. Do you think people can really change? It was such an enormous question from such a small person. I think people can try, I said carefully. And trying is what matters. But change takes time, and it's okay to wait and see. Oliver nodded slowly. I'm going to wait and see, but I'm also going to tell her if she messes up again. Dr. Pacheco says it's okay to have boundaries. 7 years old and talking about boundaries. Jesus. The change in Oliver was gradual but noticeable. Dr. Pacheco worked with him on expressing his feelings in healthier ways, through journaling, through talking, through art that explored the full spectrum of his emotions instead of just gray. Denise followed through on her promises, which shocked both of us. The Sunday video calls became sacred. She'd set an alarm, close her laptop, and give Oliver her full attention for an hour. She started a shared journal with him, sending pages back and forth where they'd write and draw together. She planned a visit for spring break and actually showed up, spending 4 full days with us where she wasn't distracted, wasn't checked out, was just mom. I watched Oliver light up around her in ways I hadn't seen in over a year, and I felt a complicated mix of relief and resentment that I tried to process in my own therapy sessions. But the healing wasn't linear. There were setbacks, a week where Denise had to cancel a call because of a work emergency, and Oliver spent the next 2 days drawing gray figures again. A parent-teacher conference where Mrs. Kowalski mentioned Oliver had gotten into a fight with another kid who'd made a joke about absent parents. A night when Oliver had a nightmare about being invisible, where he'd walk through the house calling for people who couldn't hear him. Each setback felt like proof that the damage was permanent, that we'd waited too long, that my son would carry this particular shade of gray forever. But Dr. Pacheco kept reminding me that healing wasn't about eliminating the pain. It was about learning to hold it alongside joy, to make space for both. Oliver's learning that difficult emotions don't destroy him, she explained. Each time he feels sad or angry or scared and then moves through it with support, he's building resilience. The gray isn't going away completely. It's becoming integrated. At the end of the school year, Ms. Brennan assigned another self-portrait project. This time, Oliver drew himself in color, blue shirt, brown hair, that gap-toothed smile. But he also included something new, a small gray shadow beneath his feet, like a puddle. When Ms. Brennan asked about it, Oliver explained, the gray is still there. It's part of me now, but it's not all of me anymore. She showed me the drawing at pickup, eyes bright with tears. This is what healing looks like, she said. Not erasing the pain, but integrating it. He's remarkable. I looked at the drawing, at my son's colorful figure standing confidently with his shadow underneath, and thought about all the ways we carry our hurts with us, how they don't disappear, but they can become smaller, manageable, a part of our story instead of the whole story. Dr. Pacheco eventually phased Oliver out of regular therapy, moving to monthly check-ins. He's processing things beautifully, she told me. He's learned that his feelings matter, that expressing them doesn't make people leave, that he can be angry and sad and still be loved. That's huge for a 7-year-old. She recommended I continue my own therapy, which I did, because Dr. Frost had pointed out some uncomfortable truths about my own tendency to people-please and avoid conflict, patterns that had contributed to the breakdown of my marriage and my initial denial of Oliver's struggles. I didn't love the self-examination, but I couldn't argue with the results. I felt more present, more authentic, less like I was performing the role of good dad, and more like I was just being one. One afternoon, about 6 months into Oliver's recovery, his best friend's mom, Lisa Nguyen, pulled me aside at pickup. "I don't know what you did," she said, "but Oliver seems like a different kid. My son mentioned that Oliver used to be quiet sad, but now he's loud happy again." She laughed at the terminology, but I felt it land. Quiet sad. That's exactly what he'd been, and I'd mistaken it for contentment. "We got help," I said simply. "Professional help. Therapy." Lisa nodded. "Good for you. Too many parents try to tough it out alone." We stood there watching our kids play on the jungle gym, and I thought about how close I'd come to being one of those parents who missed it entirely, who wrote off the warning signs as artistic phases or childhood quirks. How if Ms. Brennan hadn't been paying attention, if her hands hadn't shaken enough to make her speak up, Oliver might have spent years in that gray space, learning to make himself smaller and smaller until he disappeared entirely. The summer Oliver turned 8, we took a trip to the Natural History Museum, just the two of us. He spent 3 hours in the dinosaur exhibit, explaining each species with the confidence of a seasoned paleontologist. We stopped at the gift shop on the way out, and he picked out a set of oil pastels, professional grade ones that cost more than I wanted to spend, but that I bought anyway because his eyes lit up when he saw them. That night, he drew a picture of the two of us at the museum, and we were both rendered in bright, bold colors, him in red, me in green. No gray in sight. "This is my favorite picture I've ever drawn," he said, signing it carefully in the corner. I taped it to the fridge, where it stayed for years, a reminder that sometimes the scariest moments of parenting, the moments where you realize you've missed something crucial, where you have to acknowledge your failures and your child's pain, are also the moments where real connection becomes possible. Oliver's 8th birthday came in September, and for the first time since the divorce, Denise was actually there for it. She'd requested time off 2 months in advance, booked her flight early, and stayed at a nearby hotel so she could be present for the whole weekend without the tension of staying at our house. The party was at the park, our park with the duck pond, and Oliver invited his entire 2nd grade class. I watched him run around with his friends, colorful and loud and fully present, and caught Denise's eye across the picnic area. She was crying, and when I raised an eyebrow in question, she mouthed, "Thank you." For what, exactly, I wasn't sure. For not giving up on co-parenting? For making her face the consequences of her choices? For raising our son into this bright, resilient person? Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. Maybe just for seeing Oliver when he needed to be seen. During the party, one of Oliver's classmates spilled juice on his shirt, and he ran to me laughing, asking for the spare I always kept in the car. While I was digging through the trunk, Denise appeared beside me. "He's happy," she said, and it wasn't a question. "He is now," I replied. "But it took work to get here. It took all of us showing up." She nodded. "I know I almost lost him. Not physically, but emotionally. I could feel him pulling away, building walls. And I told myself it was normal, that kids do that he was just getting older. But it wasn't normal. It was protective." She took a shaky breath. "Thank you for not letting me get away with that lie, for making me see what I was doing." I didn't know what to say, so I just handed her the clean shirt and watched her run back to Oliver, watched them laugh together as she helped him change, watched my son reach for his mother's hand naturally, without hesitation. That casual intimacy, that trust, it had taken months to rebuild, but seeing it restored felt like witnessing a small miracle. Years later, when Oliver was in high school and we were driving home from a college campus visit, he brought up the gray phase unprompted. "Remember when I used to draw myself gray?" he asked, and I felt my chest tighten with remembered fear. I think about that sometimes. How scary it must have been for you. "It was terrifying," I admitted. "I thought I was failing you." Oliver shook his head. "You didn't fail me, Dad. You listened. When I finally told you what was wrong, you didn't dismiss it or minimize it. You helped me fix it. That's not failure. That's the opposite." We drove in comfortable silence for a moment, and then Oliver added, "I'm glad I went through it, honestly. It taught me that it's okay to not be okay, that feelings don't make you weak, that asking for help is brave. I use that all the time now." He gestured to himself. "Still carrying that gray shadow around, I guess. But it doesn't scare me anymore." I thought about Ms. Brennan's shaking hands as she slid those drawings across the table, about Dr. Pacheco's gentle questions, about Denise's late-night promise to do better, about all the small, painful moments that had led to this one, my 17-year-old son, confident and self-aware, comfortable with his own complexity. "You know what the scariest part was?" I said. "Realizing I'd been looking at you every day but not really seeing you, not seeing what you needed me to see." Oliver considered this. "I think that's most people, though. We all walk around assuming we understand each other, but we're all just making our best guesses. The important thing is what you do when you realize you guessed wrong." He was right, of course. He was always right. My kid who'd learned at 7 years old how to hold both pain and hope in the same small body, who'd colored himself gray until someone noticed, who'd carried that shadow all the way into near adulthood and made it part of his strength instead of his shame. The college we'd just visited had an excellent art therapy program, which was why Oliver wanted to see it. He'd been planning this career path since middle school, when he'd started volunteering with younger kids who'd gone through similar struggles. I remembered the first time he'd mentioned it, how he'd said, "I know what it feels like to not have words for the bad stuff. I want to help kids find their words." Now, walking across that campus, meeting with professors who specialized in childhood trauma and creative healing, I'd watched my son come alive in a way that reminded me of that first colorful self-portrait, the one where he'd acknowledged the shadow but refused to let it define him. "This is where I belong," he'd said with absolute certainty, and I'd believed him because Oliver had always known himself, even in the gray periods, especially in the gray periods. The title of this story suggests a crisis, but the real crisis wasn't the drawings themselves. It was the moment I realized that being physically present wasn't the same as being emotionally attuned, that my son had been telling me something crucial through the only language available to him, and I'd almost missed it entirely. Oliver's gray phase lasted 3 months on paper, but its lessons, about presence, about pain, about the courage it takes to admit when you're not okay, those lasted forever. Sometimes I still see that first drawing in my mind, my 7-year-old son, rendered in careful gray crayon, smiling that gap-toothed smile in a colorful world he felt disconnected from. And I'm grateful every day that Ms. Brennan's hands shook hard enough to make her speak up, that she cared enough to see past the surface to the hurt underneath. Because that's what saved Oliver, in the end. Not therapy or co-parenting plans or promises to do better, though those all helped. What saved him was being seen, being witnessed in his pain, being told that his feelings mattered enough to take seriously. If there's a lesson in all this, it's probably something trite about the importance of communication or paying attention to warning signs. But the real lesson, the one I learned in that elementary school conference room with alphabet borders and motivational posters, is that sometimes the scariest thing in parenting isn't the big, obvious disasters. It's the quiet erosion of a child's sense of self, happening slowly enough that you miss it until a teacher slides 12 gray drawings across a table and says, with shaking hands, that she's concerned. It's the realization that your child has been hurting, has been trying to tell you, and you've been so busy keeping everything else together that you didn't hear. That's the nightmare. Not the problem itself, but the near miss. The almost too late. The what if no one had noticed. I carry that with me now, the weight of almost failing to see. It makes me a better parent, I think. More humble. More willing to ask questions instead of assuming answers. More ready to sit with discomfort if it means my kid feels heard. Oliver's in college now, studying art therapy because of course he is. He wants to help other kids who don't have the words for what they're feeling, who communicate through color and line, and the careful absence of both. He showed me his application essay once, and it was about the gray phase, about learning that healing isn't about erasing the hard parts, but about integrating them into a larger, more complete picture of yourself. "I'm going to help kids paint themselves gray if they need to," he wrote. "And then I'm going to help them understand what the gray is trying to say." When I read that, I cried for the 3rd time since this all started. First in Dr. Pacheco's office, then at Oliver's 8th birthday party, and now reading his essay about turning his childhood pain into purpose. The gray became a shadow, and the shadow became a story, and the story became a calling. That's what healing looks like, I guess. Not perfect, not painless, but purposeful. Last month, Oliver came home for winter break and brought a painting he'd done in his advanced studio class. It was a self-portrait, but unlike those careful crayon drawings from 3rd grade, this one was explosive with color. Reds and blues and yellows layered thick with palette knife, almost violent in their intensity. But underneath, if you looked carefully, you could see the faint gray underpainting, the foundation everything else was built on. "It's called shadow work," he explained, leaning it against the wall in our living room. "The gray is still there. It's always there. But now it's just structure, you know? It's not the whole picture. It's what the picture is built on." I studied the painting, this loud, confident, beautifully chaotic self-portrait, and thought about that quiet 7-year-old who'd colored himself the shade of forgetting. "I'm proud of you," I said, inadequate words for the enormity of what I felt. Oliver grinned, still gap-toothed, even after years of dental work. "I know, Dad. That's why I'm not gray anymore." Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.